בוקר טוב. כן, ברגע שזה יגיע תקבלו, בוודאי.
זה קורה הרבה.
גילי, בבקשה.
בכיף.
אוקיי, בוקר טוב לכולם, לכל המשתתפים, לכל מי שהצטרף אלינו עד עכשיו. אנחנו מתחילים כרגע את הוובינר שלנו, AI Cost Management.
גם הוא, גם...
כל מי שלא במיוט, שיבוא למיוט בבקשה.
שלא יבלע את המוח.
AI Cost Management, Control Cost and Maximize Business Value Webinar. שוב, בוקר טוב לכולם, ברוכים הבאים לוובינר. תחילה הצגה קצרה שלנו. שמי גילי חזני, אני מנהל את פעילות טכנולוגיות ניהול בנס פרו, מוביל את הפעילות של פלקסרה בישראל.
זה פשוט רשום בקטן.
אתה
יכול להעביר את כולם להשתק?
זה יכול רשום בגדול,
כן.
בנספח רשום את החברה האמריקאית.
גילי, בבקשה.
אפשר, מצוין. אז בוקר טוב לכולם שוב פעם, ברוכים הבאים לוובינר. אז תחילה הצגה קצרה שלנו, שמי גילי חזני, אני מנהל את פעילות טכנולוגיות ניהול בנס פרו, מוביל את הפעילות של פלקסרה בישראל. אני מזכיר שהוובינר יהיה ברובו באנגלית, למעט החלק הראשון. יובל, בבקשה.
יובל, תוציא את עצמך מהשתק בבקשה.
מעולה. היי חבר'ה. ככה, אז שלום לכולם, נעים מאוד, שמי יובל פרצ'יקוב, אני מוביל תחום הפינופס בנס קלאוד. בנס אנחנו מספקים שירותי פינופס מנוהל שמחבר בין שלושת עמודי התווך המרכזיים של התחום, פינופס as a service, פינופס as a culture, וכמו שאתם רואים שמה שאנחנו מתמקדים בו היום, פינופס for AI.
יובל, תודה, אנחנו עוד רגע נדבר על זה. ג'רמי, please, introduce yourself.
Certainly, as excited to be here. Apologies, my introduction and the rest of the presentation won't be in Hebrew. Haven't practiced too much there. Jeremy Chaplin, I'm from Flexera. I'm the Senior Director of FinOps Solution Architecture and Advisory there globally. And very excited to share with you today about the AI cost crisis and how we can establish that business value from your AI technology spend. Thanks to Gilly and thanks to Yuval and the team at Ness for letting me present today.
Amazing, thank you very much, Jeremy. אז ככה, אז ברוכים הבאים, אנחנו באמת שמחים שאתם פה, וכמות הנרשמים גם מידע כמה הנושא הזה רלוונטי ומעניין. כולנו שומעים היום את המונח FinOps for AI, כי כשאנחנו מדברים על עולם ה-AI, הכללים משתנים. אבל השינוי של הכללים זה לא האתגר האמיתי של כל מי שנמצא פה והצטרף לוובינר שלנו, כי לאורך השנים הטכנולוגיות מתפתחות, נוצרים אתגרים חדשים ובהתאם מפותחים פתרונות מותאמים. ויש לכולנו אתגר אחד שאף פעם לא משתנה ותמיד נשאר אותו האתגר, וזה בעצם איך להישאר ממוקד ולתמוך בביזנס, לתמוך בתהליכים העסקיים שיעזרו לצמיחת העסק. וכאן תפס אותי משפט שאמר ג'רמי צ'פלין, שאנחנו באמת מאוד שמחים שהוא איתנו כאן היום. הוא אמנם אמר את זה באנגלית, אבל המשמעות נשארת אותו דבר גם בעברית. בסוף פינופס, בין אם ל-AI ובין אם לא, זה לא כלי שמטרתו ליצור חסכונות. החיסכון זה בסך הכל רק אמצעי. המטרה האמיתית היא כלי להצמחת העסק ולתמוך ברווחיות שלו. באמת היום אנחנו לא כאן רק כדי לדבר על איך להפחית עלויות. זה חשוב, אבל אנחנו כאן כדי לדבר על איך להפוך את ניהול הוצאות ה-AI שלנו לכלי אסטרטגי. המטרה שלנו היא לא רק לדעת כמה שלנו, אלא לדעת בדיוק איזה ערך עסקי קיבלנו עבור כל דולר שהושקע. כמה עלה לנו התהליך של פתיחת חשבון בנק, כמה עלה לנו להפיק אימייל שיווקי מבוסס AI. כשאנחנו נחבר את ההוצאה הטכנית הזאת ישר לשורה התחתונה של ה-ROI העסקי שלנו, אנחנו מפסיקים להיות אלו שמכבים שריפות והופכים בעצם לשותפים אסטרטגיים בהחלטות על ההשקעה הבאה של הארגון. את הוובינר הוביל ג'רמי, כמובן זה יהיה באנגלית, בסוף יהיה זמן לשאלות, אתם מוזמנים לרשום את השאלות בצ'אט, נשתדל להתייחס לכל השאלות בסוף, ההקלטה גם אמורה להישלח לכולכם. רגע לפני שאני מעביר לג'רמי, יובל בבקשה.
אז כן, כמו שהתחלתי להגיד, אז אנחנו בנס מאמינים שניהול העלויות כבר לא מסתכם רק ב-Azure, AWS ו-GCP. מעבר המואץ רגע לעולמות ה-AI, ארגונים נדרשים להבין גם את העלויות טוקנים, מודלים, רישוי, שימוש עסקי ב-AI. וכדי לתת מענה מלא אנחנו משלבים מומחיות אנושית, מתודולוגיית פינופס מתקדמות ואת מערכת פלקסרה, שמספקת את התשתית הטכנולוגית לניהול, בקרה ואופטימיזציה של העלויות. המטרה שלנו היא לעזור לארגונים לקבל שקיפות מלאה על ההוצאות שלהם, לייצר שליטה תקציבית ולמקסם את הערך העסקי שהם מקבלים מהענן ומה-AI. אז אחרי רגע שהבנו רגע את הגישה של נס לניהול העלויות AI, בואו רגע נצלול יותר לעומק לאתגרים ונראה איך זה נראה בפועל בתוך פלטפורמת פלקסרה. אז ג'רמי.
Please, Jeremy, take the lead.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for the introduction. Hopefully you can now see the slides on your screen with the agenda. Everybody
Yes,
see that okay? Good
Yes,
to go.
yes, please.
All right. So we've done some introductions there. Appreciate it. Thank you, Gilly. Thank you, Val, for queuing us up here. For the next 20 minutes or so, we'll have a look at how AI is affecting us in terms of the cost crisis that we're all faced with. We'll talk a little bit about FinOps for AI, now really called tokenomics, and we'll explore that a little bit as well. But really that's focused on unit economics for AI, right? How do we establish business value and get to a position where we can actually say, this investment is worthwhile. We can grow our business by continuing this investment and so on. And then we're going to take a look at the platform itself from Flexera, explore how the platform can help you in a number of areas to support that AI business value outcome. We'll look at our FinOps for AI capabilities. We'll look at the data cloud layer for Databricks and Snowflake. And then we're going to look at some kind of unit economic KPIs as well as our AI cost management solution. Please feel free to pop some questions in the chat and we'll get to those and have a Q&A at the end. So let's get going. The AI cost crisis that faces us today. What is the kind of cause of that? What is underlying this cost crisis that we're facing? And initially, the conversations that I was having were concern about jobs, right? AI is taking over jobs. Organizations are making significant investment in AI and laying off staff, left, right, and center in order to fund this investment in technology. And there's some great statistics that we hear from the analysts like Gartner, where people are forecasting, of course, technology spend to overtake that on human capital, right? Of course, the AI investment powering that shift in where we're actually, spending money on the technology versus the people and the skills. But ultimately, that's changed, right? Anybody that's following on in LinkedIn and seeing the posts there is actually the cost is becoming a problem. Businesses are reversing those decisions that they made to lay off people and invest in AI because they can't establish the value that they're getting, or actually AI isn't delivering the outcomes or the accuracy that they need in order to deliver value to their customers. And so operating AI is becoming a cost problem and a problem of running that at scale, and it's prolific. Every conversation I've had over the last 2 weeks since I returned from FinOps X has been about how do I control this? I've used up my GitHub Copilot tokens on the 5th of the month, and my developers are asking me what they should do, right? Hopefully they can still develop, but we're looking for productivity gains, with AI. And so people are being ultimately held kind of hostage to renewing or extending the number of tokens and usage meters that they're buying from these vendors. And that's resulting in a cost crisis. It really is. You have all joined the webinar today, and I suspect you're hearing the same message, from your customers and probably internally yourselves. What does that look like? Well, it's not just a problem that's facing, small, medium enterprises. We see stories in the press here from Microsoft and from Uber and other big organizations, and the really big numbers here on the screen, right? 500 million spent on Claude. I mean, it's an insane situation to be in. And the opacity of AI is staggering, right? A lot of us have been on the journey from desktop through data center, through cloud and into AI. And of course, we've had, the virtualization in the data center of machines. We've had virtualization in cloud, and we've had Kubernetes, again, abstracting us from the actual cost of running workloads and applications. But this is next level. We have no transparency into when I write a query, when I write a prompt, when I ask AI to take an action or produce an output for me. Well, what might that even cost? Being able to predict that up front it is extremely difficult, nigh on impossible at this point in time. And whilst we're seeing some industry trends that kind of look positive on the surface, unit cost of a AI token dropping quite significantly over the time since the GPT-3 kind of models, the consumption is exponential. It far outstrips that drop in cost, and usage is forecast to hit this crazy number, 120 quadrillion tokens by 2030. Not only that, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when I give you some of the kind of insights I realized whilst I was at FinOpsX, AI is also supply constrained. And it's the first time really, certainly in my time in technology, where we've actually seen supply constraints and the cost of technology possibly increasing over time. So we can't guarantee that that cost will continue to drop, and we're certain that it won't drop in line with the exponential growth of usage. And that's driven not just by our use of AI, but AI is actually triggering additional AI tasks and calls. It's reasoning with itself. It's validating the outputs that it's producing. It's retrying if that validation fails, triggering calls to data layers, compute layers, and iterating over itself. And so tracking token consumption and forecasting consumption and usage, ultimately to calculate value, becomes again increasingly impossible, because you have no idea as to how that model or that query will operate. And so AI is generating AI calls and token consumption, and hence the exponential growth as we move out of this kind of data and training era into the inference era. And this is really, as I said, costs are driven by usage, real-time execution that is causing us a problem. Of course, the data layer is important, and we'll talk about in the demo, the data cloud optimization aspect of this. We need to get that data layer right. But now we're in a situation where the actual compute and consumption and real-time execution is causing significant pain points. So we've got this new economic model, right? We've got this situation where we can't really forecast consumption very easily. We have no way of kind of budgeting and planning. We can't even track the consumption and understand who's using it, let alone attribute that consumption to business value. And if that all sounds very familiar, that was the start of the journey as we went into cloud. People were consuming cloud, possibly on their credit cards initially, and nobody had any control over what that looked like. Very quickly, it became a material line item on the profit and loss, and got some focus from finance teams and the C-suite. And we've been able to, leveraging things like the FinOps framework, start to address the challenges in terms of budget and forecast, and ultimately measuring and monitoring and governing and controlling what is a variable cost model, a price times quantity model. And now AI has come along and disrupted that again. And so we need to kind of repeat that exercise. How do we measure these things? How do we look at that in terms of the value that is derived to the business? And we'll start to explore that a little further. The unit that the industry is settled on, whether you agree with it or not at this point in time, is a token. A token is a unit of consumption, but it's a unit of consumption of compute. It's a unit of consumption of reasoning. It's a unit of consumption at the output layer as well as the input layer. And so we need to think carefully about, well, what is it we're actually trying to measure here? and whether the value is actually in dollars or if it's different business outcomes in terms of performance and the efficiency of your resources and staff in terms of producing code and outputs. And so we're going to use tokenomics and tokens as the measure and the unit that we can use to optimize the consumption of AI, much as we've looked at unit economics in traditional FinOps for public cloud. We need to translate that token consumption into what it's doing for your business. Now, the size of the problem is substantial. Here's a forecast from Gartner. I enjoyed writing in the number of zeros here, right? $2.5 trillion forecast for 2026. And every month, as they went through 25, this number kept ticking up. It was, originally 2 trillion, and then a month or so later, it's 2.5 trillion. So interested to see what the projection will be like. But, this is material. It's material for you and your businesses. And Ness and the team here are, here to support us manage this problem of significant scale. Where we've landed, of course, is in a situation where we have no visibility yet again. The virtualization layer, the Kubernetes layer, the cloud layers of abstraction caused us visibility problems. And of course, we can't manage what we can't see. But the visibility gap, specifically with AI, is a different problem for us to solve, in part because consumption and the resources that are powering our AI journeys sit everywhere. They sit in the SaaS applications that you're consuming, whether it's Office 365 and Copilot or their workflow tools, whether it's GitHub Copilot, or whether it's tools and models that you have access to via your investment with the public cloud vendors. And in many cases, and in part due to the supply constraints we see, many organizations utilizing GPU and compute resources that they have in the data center, and also, of course, from security perspective, a lot of organizations doing that. So the things that we're familiar with using the FinOps framework, the budgeting, the forecasting, optimization, getting to a position where we could show back these costs or even charge back the costs to the consumers within your business so that they take accountability for those costs. This is now broken. Many solutions only provide that visibility into your public cloud offering. And what we want to help you with is look more broadly, look at your technology investments, because only then can you understand the true cost of AI. And of course, understanding that total cost of ownership is what we need to do in the path to then understanding the value that it brings to your business. Now, I can sit here and tell you the challenge exists, and of course the team at Ness can do that as well, and you wouldn't have joined the webinar here if it wasn't a particular problem for you. But ultimately, the practitioners, the FinOps Foundation members here have told us and have told the foundation that they are being asked to tackle this challenge. 98% of respondents, and this was earlier in the year, have said they are being asked to manage AI spend. Whether that's just in public cloud or more broadly, we'll find out. But honestly, the conversations that I had whilst at FinOpsX and since I've returned, I would say 100% of people are looking at this problem, right? It is topic du jour, and we're all tasked to manage that. So let's transition now. We've understood the problem. We understand the size of the problem. Let's look at how we can tackle that. But before we go into that, I wanted to share a couple of insights with you that I took away when I attended FinOpsX. So forgive the slides. These are just screenshots from the recording of JR and another attendee from Pinterest from FinOpsX. But I wanted to just share with you what I was seeing on stage. And the first one, that I'm sharing here is, of course, we're focused on the consumption of AI. That's the area that most organizations will be focused on. And of course, understanding that consumption and doing the things that we do in FinOps around allocation and forecasting and so on are important for us to be able to establish value. But the takeaway I had here was also the production problem, and I've alluded to that in previous slides. We're supply constrained here. We don't have enough silicon. Anybody buying, RAM has seen a tripling in cost, even for RAM in the desktop environment, because the data centers and the AI providers are buying literally anything that they can get their hands on and paying, top prices for those things. So we do need to change our kind of mental model a little bit and also focus on the production side. Am I running the most efficient GPUs? Am I leveraging the technology I have in the data center or even in the cloud, using the most efficient models, using the most efficient technology? What is the sustainability impact of what I'm doing? Am I providing power to my data center in a cost-effective way? All of those things underpin ultimately the value that you're getting, because it changes the unit cost of a token. So that's just a bit of a mental shift, certainly for me. I'm hoping it kind of resonates for you as well. The second takeaway that I had was, and again, I mentioned this, but understanding value, right? I had a conversation whilst at FinOps over a coffee with our CTO at Flexera and said, well, what does value mean? How are you measuring the value of AI that Flexera uses? And his immediate response, of course, was productivity. He has a team of developers and engineers under him, and he wants to know how efficient and how productive they're being with the tools that we're spending money on. And my immediate view of value was actually on the product side as a FinOps practitioner. How do I know that what we're investing in is growing my business and delivering value? And of course, I might measure that in dollars and in revenue growth. And so we have to think about this a little carefully about, well, who is the persona? Who are you asking what value means? And ultimately, what is the unit of value? Yes, of course, developer productivity ultimately, hopefully drives, revenue increase and growth in the business. But we have to have those kind of interim measures. It's very difficult to take that productivity and directly translate it into business growth. So again, think a little bit carefully about what it means to you and where your role in the business is in terms of the consumption of AI. So what's required for us to tackle this challenge? Clearly, we've seen there's a massive challenge. It's $2.5 trillion of spend that's effectively unmanaged, and it sits across data center, it sits across SaaS, it's in the public cloud, it's everywhere. It's in your phone and the technology that we're wearing, day in and day out. And so Flexera's approach here, supporting Ness and their expertise, is a platform approach, right? An approach where we already have significant maturity in gathering the data, the ecosystem that is powering your business by any of the vendors that you'll see on the bottom of the slide here. We have to be experts in collecting that data. But of course, that's relatively trivial. We already do that extremely well in the data center, in the cloud, for SaaS applications, and now for AI. But it's then the knowledge layer that we apply on top of that. Collecting that data, great. Many organizations are doing that for maybe one or two of these domains. But the expertise in normalizing, categorizing it and classifying it, applying business context to that data is critical, right? One AI model and its naming convention in public cloud does not match up with how it might be named or the SKUs that are used if you connect directly to those foundational AI models. A software license in cloud doesn't match up with a software license that you own. A server in the data center doesn't match up with a server in the cloud. And so when we measure value, we need to measure efficiently and accurately what we own and what we're consuming. And so that knowledge layer is super, super critical. And of course, once we get that right and we have an accurate view of what we own, we can enrich it. We can add power consumption information. We can add sustainability and carbon data. We can add, information about security and patch and other things on top of it. And only then can we get to this insight layer, understanding what we're consuming, understanding it in the context of your business. This particular team are using AI. We understand the cost of what they're using, and we know that they're producing output that powers my particular sales application or the web portal that my customers log in to transact on. And so I can understand how that investment is powering the value that I'm providing to my customers. So we need to do that well to get that kind of insight. And then ultimately, we can sit on top of that automated outcomes. We can leverage AI to benefit itself and to help us solve those problems. Maybe you want an MCP server across that data that I've just described in order to use your own models and interrogate that data. We have that MCP server available, and you can go and ask a question like, where should I place this workload given that, cost and sustainability, latency and security are my business priorities, and have it tell you the most efficient way that you could power that application, whether you could use licenses that you already own, whether a particular region of hosting might be more sustainable than the region that you've planned. Pulling together and using AI to drive insights into the challenges that we face. And ultimately using ML, workflow automation and other things to help us address this problem at scale. Now, Flexera has a strong heritage, and as I said, the SaaS applications, the cloud, the on-premise, but what we're going to see today and what we're delivering over the next coming months are not just ingesting that data that we already see for AI consumption in those domains, but also reaching out directly to the AI data platforms, to the AI models, the AI apps, and even the agents that you're buying or indeed building. And so we've got a different area of consumption that we need to ingest. And of course, there are different levels of maturity. J.R. Storm on stage at FinOps says nobody is a runner. Nobody in FinOps is running. And the reason that's true is the constant rate of change. And that could be never truer in the AI space. Nobody is at the level of maturity. And so many of these vendors don't expose consumption via API, don't let you attribute AI consumption to a particular user or team or group. So maturity in that area will take time, but we're in a good place to solve that. And ultimately, we want to get to this view, okay? Who is consuming it? What part of business does that relate to in terms of their consumption? What are they consuming? What different models are they using? Are they the right models? And ultimately, how much are they spending on that compute? And what does that look like over time? Trending those things is important. The consumption may be increasing. At the moment, nobody knows if that's a good thing. Costs are going up, but our revenue's going up in a similar way. Is this powering your business, or is this just becoming an area where I'm sinking cost and not being able to understand whether I'm getting a return on that investment? And then ultimately trying to do some sort of prediction. Super hard. Can't profess that we've even solved this necessarily for public cloud consumption, but we certainly need to try and start to do this for AI. And what we've learned from budgeting and forecasting in the cloud space is let's start early. Let's keep this simple and build on top of it, build maturity on top of it. And ultimately, very, very important right now, as I said, the conversations that I'm having are, hey, I just bust through my token allowance and it's only the 3rd of the month. So how do we get to this view where we get alerted? We understand the rate of consumption and what that means, for my forecast within the current month or the current year, and getting the system to alert me for anomalies or things that run out of control. And so leveraging the Flexera platform is going to help us understand at each layer in the stack here what the consumption is, okay, what we're spending on it, and ultimately how we attribute that to business value. The Flexera platform provides capabilities across a different range of domains, both, of course, in the visibility space, but also in rate and workload optimization, using things like commitment management to ensure that you're paying at the minimum possible, not the pay-as-you-go rates. Using Spot to ensure that you're using discounted compute up to 80% discount there, and ultimately optimizing things like the data clouds, the Kubernetes environments, and other compute layers to ensure that you're being most efficient. But what this actually translates into is actually getting world-class discounts on the technology that you're consuming here. Stacking these discounts on top of each other, and you go and talk to some of our customers, and Ness's customers that are using this efficiently, they're paying 80, maybe 85% less than the public cloud rate. And ultimately what that means for their business is that their margins are much better, and their profitability is much better, and their market positioning and the prices that they're charging are much better. This gives you a genuine competitive advantage. So I'm going to skip quickly through the next slides, because this really just shares with you what I'm going to show in the demo. I'm on time here to jump into the demo, but we're going to have a look at things like how we solve problems for data clouds. You can see here actually the number one problem for FinOps practitioners in terms of visibility at the data layer, let alone at the AI layer. We're going to have a look at the visibility that we can provide for data clouds, the optimization recommendations that we can drive out of the platform to help you get efficient at that level. Remember, we've still got to train those models, and the data that underpins it is super important. We'll have a look at the capabilities for AI and ML spend visibility, and how you can start to attribute that to parts of your business, how you can do budgeting and forecasting. And ultimately where we want to get to is this unit cost. What is the cost of a token and this arbitrary unit of consumption, and how do I relate that to the business services that I'm running? And this is the critical outcome that we're getting to. This is where true value attribution to the part of your business is super, super important. So hopefully that was useful, a little bit of insight. Let's come away from the slides here. Let's have a look at the platform. If you'll just bear with me for a minute, I'm just going to stop the screen share and switch over to my demo. Okay, just getting things loaded up here. I clearly talk too much because my sessions have timed out, but that's not completely unexpected. Let me just re-log in, and we'll get into the platform here. Okay, share my screen. Let's have a look. Let me know, Gilly, if you can see my screen again.
Yes, we can. It's
Great
okay.
stuff. All right, tracking that we're on time, we look to be good. So let's have a look here at the demo environment for Flexera 1. So this is our platform that covers all of your areas of technology spend. We're going to have a look at a few areas, as I said, showing you in the slides there, around how we can give you visibility of that AI spend, how we can help you optimize things like the data cloud level, but ultimately how we can get to kind of some of those critical KPIs about unit cost, cost per token, and how that powers your business. So let's have a look at some dashboards to start with. Here we've got our regular FinOps dashboard for the practitioner that's trying to get some insight into their cloud spend. And here you can see, well, we've got a range of different clouds in the platform. We can see Databricks spend. We've got some VMware spend from on-premise. We've ingested Kubernetes costs so that we can get below the namespace layer and understand the cost of applications, right? But ultimately, great to see the cloud vendors, but maybe we want to drill in and say, okay, for our Amazon spend, what am I consuming in terms of AI? And we provide then a view of AI spend here, and you'll see a list of all of the different components that are available. We'll get rid of the non-AI spend. I can start to see the costs for the different models and tools that I am consuming here. Okay, look at my AI spend over time increasing as we would expect, right? We saw that token consumption graph expanding massively. And it's easy for me to then drill into any of these, right? What is the big areas of spend that I have? I've got something going on Opus 4.8 here. So maybe I could drill further into that, identify Opus 4.8 and see what kind of workload types I've got running there. We can then drill in and see it from Opus consumption. Well, what is actually causing that cost, right? What is the cost drivers behind that? And ultimately, we can dig down further, understanding the patterns over time and getting to a view of usage, right? So that we can ultimately say, well, how many tokens am I consuming that make up that cost? So let me switch over to a more detailed view of a table where we can drill into that, right? So we've got the different models that we're consuming, the different workload types, the different measures of tokens where they're input or output. And ultimately, I can start to focus on those. Let's have a look again at the different models here that I've got consumption of. And I can use this information, right, the workload, the service types, the workload types, to allocate that cost, allocate it to a business application, allocate it to a department. But I'm also able to drive further inference from this. I can run anomaly detection across my AI models, right? Tell me where things are spiking, tell me where things are out of control, alert me, to usage patterns like this, where suddenly somebody is spending $1,000 in a day on an AI model that we weren't using before, right? Spike in Opus 4.7 here. We've got volatile usage again in different models, batch inference consumption, streaming inference consumption for Claude, okay? So having the system notify you is really fundamental to starting to manage our consumption patterns and our usage patterns. And ultimately, what we also want to be able to do is do things like budget and forecast. And so using our cost planning tooling, as well as the dimensions that we've exposed there that give us visibility, I can set a budget for these things. I can put it in department or cost center context or whatever I might be wanting to do. I can use our ML model to provide a forecast. And so I built this morning. Obviously, budget and forecast are matched at this time, but my usage month by month over time does not match that forecast. And I would get anomaly alerts when I was outside of my kind of planned budget range, so that I could go and understand, well, what are the drivers behind me exceeding my budget in May? What consumption patterns did I have that are going to result in me, missing the budget plans that I had? So effectively using the FinOps tools and capabilities to get that additional insight into our AI spend. The second piece that I wanted to share with you is the underlying layer, the data cloud layer. But before I do that, obviously with that kind of visibility and capability that we have, we can build dashboards that give us insight into that spend. What am I spending in the different clouds? What am I spending as an aggregate over time? Which services am I consuming? And obviously getting down to the number of requests, the number of tokens, token utilization graphs, and ultimately the resources that are underpinning that, as well as all of the usage data that drives that, right? So really granular down to the resource level, down to the service level understanding of what I'm consuming. Now, in a similar way, if we go and have a look at data clouds for maybe Databricks, and Snowflake is also supported, I get a view of what is happening at the data layer. Lots of questions coming in, so appreciate that. We'll get to those when we get to the Q&A. So here I'm looking at my Databricks layer, right? Where actually all of the data and analytics layer is being run, whether it's serverless, whether it's scheduled jobs, or whether it's using SQL warehouses, and the different types of compute that underpin that. This is all PaaS driven, but we can see the workspaces. We can see the AI spend on Databricks that is driving that cost. We can see the underpinning nodes where I'm hosting them myself, and obviously using that Flexera breadth of capability, including discount management and spot technologies, we can run those workloads on the most efficient infrastructure possible with the biggest discounts possible. I can see the SKUs for consumption, okay? So again, we can, from the data layer upwards, start to attribute that cost to parts of your business, right? Understanding, therefore, how it's powering your organization and what value you're getting from this. Now, for both Databricks and coming for Snowflake at the end of the year are some capabilities for optimization. So you can identify areas for right sizing and driving further efficiency outside of the data cloud environment. Typically, we see around 30% savings. And certainly for me and the conversations I have in including Flexera as ourselves, as consumers of both Databricks and Snowflake, that is a big part of the problem. Consumption for many organizations in the millions of dollars of spend area. Ultimately, what we want to be able to get you to, however, is looking at some sort of kind of unit cost measure. So let's see if I can get some reports up here that would give me some sort of insight into that cost per token. And we can leverage things like Power BI to give us information about our consumption patterns, looking at the token cost, looking at the token consumption, and doing the math ultimately to get me this cost per token. Right, a unit measure of token consumption based on the different services that I'm consuming. Now, again, apply to that your business context, apply to that trends over time. Am I using the right models? Am I using the right tokens to power the business outcomes that I have, right? And ultimately, where we want to be is, of course, things like prompt optimization, model optimization. But those things are coming and developing over time, right? It can be quite intrusive, of course, to do something like prompt optimization, because you need to be seeing what people are typing and what they're asking in order to see if it's the optimal way. And so a lot of that can be education, as well as using things like model routers and so on. But where we would then get to is, the level we're at now in terms of managing public cloud, which would be to get to some sort of unit cost report. Bear with me, this may take a little while to load. There's a lot of data that ultimately underpins this. But we should be able to get you to the stage where you can say, okay, I understand my consumption. I understand the money that I'm spending at the data layer, at the compute layer. I have a unit of measure, which is a token, and I understand the unit cost. Here we're measuring in API calls and saying, well, that cost per call, is that in line with expectations, right? Maybe you wanted to do it in the context of email marketing and saying the cost of delivering a marketing email to consumers, what does that look like, right? Because you can understand then the business value that is delivering, and you can make the right investment decisions, okay? And ultimately, that's what it's about, right? As an executive, do I understand where my cost is going? And do I understand how that's driving the bottom line and the growth of the business, the top line, so that I can understand the investments that I'm making, are they delivering revenue outcomes, or do we have to refine that? Now, the direction of travel, as I said, and you saw the screenshots, is our AI cost management solution, which is taking it to the next level, right? It's ingesting not just from the cloud bill, right, but directly from the vendors, directly from the SaaS providers, the consumption that you have, right? Total spend, doing a forecast, managing that with budgets, being able to go into the platform and looking at the different tools that you're using and consumption over time. Are things exceeding budget? Are they being attributed to the consumers properly? What are their trends over time? Are your subscriptions to these services ultimately being used effectively? And then getting into the space where as we talked about, can I have an alert Can I have a forecast and a projection of what that consumption looks like? But more important for the unit cost measure is the attribution, right? The spend that I have on AI, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's direct with the vendors, whether it's via SaaS or ultimately on premise, can I allocate it to cost centers for chargeback? Can I allocate it to different teams, and the consumption that they have that is powering your business? We have to do all of these things ultimately to get you to that point where you've got a solid understanding of the value that it is bringing to your business. And so this will be coming to market just at the end of this month, available for early access, which will round out the view that Flexera has. As I said, already seeing your SaaS spend, we've seen in the demo today, already seeing all of the AI spend as it relates to your, cloud providers. But ultimately, we want to get to this level where we understand the individual consumers, whether they're AI services themselves and agents that are leveraging a token consumption, or whether they're individual users, and ultimately then what role they're playing in the business. And once we've got that view of consumption, we can then start to talk about model optimization, prompt optimization. What levers do we have to pull? And some of those are traditional, of course, at the infrastructure layer, right? The right sizing, the using commitments, RIs and savings plans in order to reduce the unit of cost I'm paying. But as we saw in the slides, we also start to have to think about the production. Am I running this in data center? Am I using the most efficient models? Is there supply constraint? What will the cost of a token be in 12 months' time? Do I know that, right? And so a lot of complexity as we start to think about the on-premise situation as much as we do the public cloud and the SaaS services that I'm consuming. And you can rest assured that those vendors are looking at more and more complex ways for licensing these solutions, right? SaaS management and license management has been a complex topic for a long time. When I'm starting to see some of the ways that the AI models, and consumption is being licensed, it's crazy. So I'd really encourage you to collaborate with IT asset management, with software asset management personas in your organization, as well as those FinOps teams that maybe are more familiar with managing usage-based and consumption-based pricing, to work together in order to solve this problem. As we said at the start, there are no runners. This is a real, new domain that we have to solve. And I'm very excited to be able to partner with Ness to help us solve this together. So I'm going to close out here from the demo. Hopefully that was kind of useful to see some of the capabilities that we have. And I'll ask Gilly if he can help us go into the Q&A stage now.
Sure, great. Thank you very much, Jeremy. It was very insightful. We have some questions. I will appreciate, guys, whenever you ask a question, please ask it in English. It will be much more easy to translate. So I will appreciate if you can understand that I will start with the question in English. And meanwhile, the guys that ask in Hebrew, please ask it in English, so I will not need to translate exactly what you meant with your questions. So the first question in English is, do we have the ability to measure the usage by user? I think it's more consumer, but please answer.
No, it's a great question. And you can see here in the mock-ups that we have, right? Getting to that user attribution is where we want to be. But different levels are, different providers are at different levels in that journey. Can we get the data programmatically? In many cases, it doesn't exist in the cloud bill, for example. So you have to make direct calls to the services in order to ingest that. So this is very much a journey for us. But yeah, in many cases, we're calling directly to those providers with our AI cost management tool in order to bring that business context. And we're already doing, of course, the contextualization in cloud, bringing those things together. The ambition here is, of course, to get us to who is consuming it, what part of the business do they underpin, and ultimately then, what revenue is that driving, or what productivity improvements, depending on the unit of measure for value. So absolutely, Gilly, that's the direction we're heading.
Thank you. Next question is, does the tool have features like better optimization, better utilization? He meant like recommendations.
Yeah, so from a recommendation point of view, we already provide recommendations in the SaaS space and in the data cloud space, and of course for cloud services. Typically the infrastructure layer for right sizing or for commitment discount and other things. We need to solve, in the context of AI and tokenomics, the visibility piece first. And then, of course, we can go into the more complex topics of the model and prompt optimization and other areas. But it's quite interesting because that becomes quite an intrusive task. As I said, we've worked with some customers and they've said, well, actually, we don't want you to be viewing the prompt data that is coming through. That's kind of either commercially or sensitive or considered PII data. So we do need to get to that stage where we can then make recommendations, but the visibility has to come first, right? You may not choose to optimize something if it's driving significant revenue growth, right? And you're using the right models. And so making recommendations without business context, they're not useful or actionable recommendations.
Thank you. Next question is it compatible with SAP AI Core?
So in terms of the list of vendors supported, I can't answer specifically for SAP AI, but I can certainly follow up on that question with an answer once I've spoken to the team here. We obviously see SAP a lot in the work that Flexera does across all of the different vendors. The approach that we've taken to building connectors is to speak to some extremely large organizations that are consuming AI, both on the partner side and direct customer side. So we have a list of around 150 connectors that we're working on at the moment. And as I said, not all vendors are providing all of the data that we need, but where we are, we're building those connectors, getting that data into the platform, and then we can go through the kind of attribution and measurement exercise that we've seen. So let's take that offline. If we can take that one, Gilly, I'll get an answer from the team in terms of where that sits in the order of 150.
Okay, great. Can you also provide cost visibility for third-party tools like Cursor or Cloud Cost?
Yeah, so we pride ourselves really in terms of being able to ingest anything into the platform. So in our demo, you saw some examples of public cloud vendors and data clouds and other areas. But the reality is we support both the Focus standard and we'll be aiming, of course, to include Focus 1.5, which will also have AI measurements in it once it's released, likely later in the year. And we have our own native standard schema for ingestion as well. So you can take anything, cost basis to push into the platform. That can include labor costs, license costs, data center, as we saw in the demo. So I can't answer specific for Cursor as to whether they provide a billing feed in Focus format, but it's often easy to kind of translate that and ETL that and push it into the platform.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is Flexera planning to get into prompt level visibility, reduction, optimization, and catching, model routing, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. The specifics of that, as I said, is a little uncertain at this time. We're working hard to solve the visibility problem, and different people have different appetites about that kind of prompt optimization. Because it's quite intrusive in terms of the data and the queries that we're gathering. But absolutely, we would look to support that, but it will definitely be something that will be an opt-in capability.
Great. And next one, how do you make the connection between the cost of tokens to compute resources required to drive AI to predict it?
How do you say that one for me again, Gilly?
Yes, it's a bit complicated. How do you make the connection between the cost of tokens to compute resources required to drive AI to predict it?
Yeah, so depends what you're doing, whether it's a buy or a build your own. Obviously, matching the token consumption to the infrastructure layer when you've built your own services requires metadata, a tagging strategy, a labeling strategy, ultimately to do that. So we can, use the metadata from the vendors where it's applicable. Again, it's a journey. Many cases that metadata doesn't exist or isn't exposed, and so this is an exercise in gathering as much of that as possible. When we're connecting to the SaaS providers, and again, directly to the kind of foundational models, the Anthropics and others of the world, in many cases that, we don't need to do that attribution to the infrastructure layer because it's a PaaS offering or a SaaS offering where you're getting the cost that includes the compute. So the short answer is it's a problem still to be solved, but it's something we're very familiar with when we start to think about, attribution to applications in the Kubernetes space, right? And taking, usage and consumption data and having to map that across to the infrastructure layer that's powering that. But work in progress for sure.
Okay, great. One of the participants translated all of her questions in English, so it's very good. We have a couple of them. So the first one is there an uniformity among the companies developing LLMs regarding how tokens are utilized? Is there a primary issue perhaps the lack of standardized normals?
Yeah, massive challenge. And that's one part of what we're trying to solve here. Let me just bring the screenshot back up. For us, in order to kind of give you a dollar amount of consumption, it's interpreting those different, units of measure. One token here doesn't equal a token there, and certainly not in terms of the value that it may bring as well. Some things are subscription-based, seat-based and other things. And so being able to kind of normalize those different pricing and consumption models and licensing models to try and get to a standard unit is part of the exercise we're going through. You can't expect that the industry are ever going to line on that, but we'll follow closely with what the FinOps Foundation and the Focus Standard are doing, because they've been quite successful in getting the industry to standardize in many ways around how those things are captured. But it's a great question. I think it's one that remains to be solved. But where we can, of course, even if a token here is not equal to a token there, as long as we can attribute a cost for a token to the business outcomes that it's driving, we should still be able to kind of get to that value measure and the unit cost that we're aiming for.
Thank you very much. Next one is, how is the prediction carried out? Is it based slowly on past performance?
Yeah, so all of our forecasting models are ML based. So they look at historical consumption patterns in order to project future usage. You can input your own data. So, it is a machine learning forecast. It doesn't know the business context. Maybe you're sunsetting an application or you're doubling your investment in Anthropic or whatever it might be. And so you can provide that additional business context. The nice thing about ML models, however, is if you've got some sort of seasonal or cyclical workloads, right, it will pick up on those patterns as it projects your usage going forward, rather than it just being some sort of straight line model. But again, early stages, it's hard enough to do in public cloud, and this is another challenge on top of that. So,
okay, thank you. Next one is, how is data collected?
In many ways, obviously, from the cloud bills, that's relatively easy. We're already ingesting, the cloud spend, and of course, there's a lot of data and metadata visible in that bill. But for the services that sit outside of cloud, then we're building connectors, right? We're using APIs and other endpoints that those vendors are providing, and you've got, of course, to credential those things and give us access to those models directly. And we have, of course, a strong heritage in SaaS consumption as well. The connectors for SaaS are both direct to the vendors where they provide them, but we also use things like browser plugins to detect SaaS usage, that might be outside of the traditional direct connection model, shadow SaaS, if you will. So there's lots of ways that we can do that discovery. But right now we've got a little bit of a connector factory going on to work through those kind of 150 services that we're seeing to find the best way to ingest that data.
Okay, thank you. Next one is, which organizational systems does the product need to integrate with in order to collect the data?
Yeah, again, that depends on individual business. So, for many, it would be an interface into public cloud and into your SaaS applications. If you're consuming data on premises, we need to find a way to ingest that as well. Customers are then looking for integration into business systems. So maybe there's a CMDB or an enterprise architecture tool that is doing mapping of technology to consumption to, business applications, a ServiceNow integration or something like that. Maybe you want outbound integrations into Jira so that when we do make recommendations, they can be pushed through to the application teams and prioritized on your backlog accordingly. So we will typically interact with any of those business systems depending on the organizational needs.
Okay, great. Last 3 questions. But how do you measure the quality of the justification of the utilization, not just the expenditure itself?
How do we measure the quality of the utilization? Well, that's definitely subjective, isn't it? Right. So challenges are, and of course, I see a question as well about productivity. How do we start to measure that? That's very difficult. And that's why I kind of shared this view of measuring revenue on the product side versus measuring productivity internally. There are things that we need to think about carefully. The revenue one, we clearly understand. The productivity, well, quite subjective, right? Is that the number of story points that we've consumed, or the number of deliveries or, pushes that I've made out into production? That's up for some discussion here. But ultimately, as we work through that, for me, certainly as a FinOps practitioner, it ultimately underpins the business value, right? How am I growing my organization? Am I reducing the unit cost and therefore improving margins? Where are the pain points in terms of what my spend is? Where should I be making investments? Really, really great questions. I really appreciate the interaction there.
Yes, and last 2. Can you share case studies where AI cost went out of control and how it was fixed? How do you measure ROI of AI initiatives beyond cost savings?
Yeah, so we have some case studies. I didn't include them in the slides, but I'll happily share the decks there, and Gilly and the Ness team can get those out to you. How do you measure ROI? Great question. So once we've worked through and get attribution to the kind of business context and business service layer, and you lay revenue data over that, we should be looking at clear return on investment here, right? We're spending X on technology that powers the business service, but revenues have grown by Y. I'm not professing that that's an easy thing to solve, but this is the journey that we're all on here together.
Correct, of course. How do you correct? This is the last one, of course. How do you connect token consumption to business productivity?
And again, that's kind of in the answer. What we want to do is get some sort of contextualization. Let's get down to the user or consumer. Let's attribute that to a team, to a cost center, to a workload, right? And start to generate. I mean, it's all about allocation and attribution. It's what we're doing with FinOps, every day, is to give you that visibility in that business context. Of course, the consumption here is at a token level, at a model level, and is a little harder for us to do. But we're working through that and bringing that context gradually over time.
Okay, great. This was the last questions. Jeremy, thank you very much. I want to thank all the participants that participated in our webinar. Of course, to you, Jeremy, for your time, for sharing all your knowledge. Thank you very much again.
All right, absolute pleasure. Appreciate you inviting me along, and thanks again to the audience for attending and the great interaction and questions. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Good luck to us all. Bye bye for now.
תודה רבה לכולם.